Welcome to Shifting Ground, the podcast of the Orbis Journal of World Affairs, brought to you by the Foreign Policy Research Institute and the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Join us every other week as our editors connect the pages of Orbis with the issues of the day.
I'm Nick Gvosdev, a professor at the Naval War College and senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute.
And I'm Larry Rubin, an associate professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at the Georgia Institute of Technology.
Together, we serve as editors of Orbis, the Journal of World Affairs.
Each episode will speak with scholars, policymakers, and practitioners about the forces reshaping global politics, international security, and world affairs.
You can find this and future episodes of Shifting Ground on our website, orbisjournal.org, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major streaming services. Please note that the views expressed by the hosts and participants in this episode are their own. This is Shifting Ground.
Good afternoon, everybody. Want to welcome you to another edition of Shifting Ground, Orbis's podcast. Today, we have Mohammed Soliman, who's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, and he focuses on the intersection of technology, geopolitics, and business in the Middle East. He's just come out with a new book, which we'll discuss in a little bit, West Asia, A New American Grand Strategy in the Middle East, and it's published by Polity Press. Came out in January 2026. It's really interesting, and we'll hear a little bit about that, is his background. Trained as an engineer. It's close to my heart in the sense that I'm a professor at Georgia Tech, so I'm surrounded by engineers, and some, we might say, a sea of engineers who are trying to make our way there. But there's a lot of intersection and a lot that he talks about when it comes to geopolitics. Nick and I are thrilled to welcome him today to talk a little bit more, and we want to start actually by asking you a few questions about your background. Could you just tell us how you came to work on this topic, especially as an engineer, and how you got into understanding and the intersection of technology and regional politics?
Thank you so much for having me. I truly enjoy your work, your intellect, and your friendship over the years. So it's such a delight that I am with you today to discuss my book, West Asia. When I go on podcast, I don't really think I get that sort of question. So I'm happy that you're asking me about my background. Like you said, I'm an engineer by training, infrastructure engineering to be much more precise. And I have a passion for maps. I love maps. I love thinking about distance, locations, cities, reorienting the maps, how we're thinking about it. So I was always obsessed when it comes to the non-traditional map of how the world looks if you are in southern Italy or if you are in the tip of the Arabian Peninsula on the Indian Ocean. So I'm always fascinated by that sort of different ways of looking into geography. Second, I'm a traveler. I am working full-time as a director at a company called McCarty Associates. I work in the Middle East team, and I also work on a lot of tech issues globally. So you'll find me in Tokyo, in Delhi, in the Arabian Gulf, Riyadh, and Doha, Abu Dhabi. I'm always in Europe. So I travel everywhere. And when you're traveling, and at some point in my life, I was commuting between Saudi Arabia and DC for personal reasons, you start linking your obsession with maps with your current realities as someone who's traveling in South Asia, Middle East, Europe, and you kind of develop that sort of sense that there's a fusion that's taking place, that the old borders that you see on the maps that separate the Middle East from South Asia, from the Mediterranean Sea, basically have no meaning at all. The very idea that you treat South Asia as a separate structure from the Middle East, from the Mediterranean at large, has nothing to do with the current realities of geopolitics. And my book, West Asia, is an attempt to make the case that the Middle East as a construct cannot really help us understand some of the political and geopolitical phenomena that we're seeing unfolding in the region. The term Middle East cannot help us explain how Turkey is very active in the Indian Ocean, with Bangladesh, with Pakistan, with the Maldives. It cannot really help us understand India's role in the Mediterranean Sea, its alliance with Israel, with Cyprus, with Greece. And also the Middle East as a construct cannot really help us understand this major role that the Gulf states are playing as a capital providers, nerve center for the global economy, how they're managing AI infrastructure buildup, and now they're acting as AI partner to so many countries. So this term Middle East did not really make any sense. So for me, West Asia felt like that term that can tell the audience, can tell policymaker, business people, intellectuals, that I want you to think about the space from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean as one integrated geopolitical and geoeconomic space.
One of the things that drew us together, and in the work that you were doing, and in the work that I was doing, and that Orbis was doing, was you were sensing and giving voice, trying to get people to recognize a new set of connectivities, right? And your point about maps is very critical, because maps both illuminate, but also maps can constrain. Where does a map begin? Where does it end? What does it include? What does it leave out? And one of the things we have discussed is that, for example, in the traditional American geopolitical mental map, we have a sense of Euro-Atlantic. So Italy and Turkey are really at the outer edges, eastern edges of that space, and it looks westward. Then there's something called the Middle East, which just sort of sits, and then, as you said, there's a South Asia, which looks eastward. And the idea that somehow these areas are actually historically, going back millennia, are actually connected to each other. And you coined a term which I really thought was innovative, and have adopted as my own. This is a great case of good artists copy, great artists steal. I've stolen your term and used it, of a notion of what you at one point were calling an Indo-Abrahamic corridor. That is, thinking about India, the Indian subcontinent being linked to the core centers of what we used to be called the Near East, but thinking through the Gulf to the Mediterranean, and then from the Mediterranean into Southern Europe, with some parallel, or with some spurs, like into Africa, and you mentioned the Gulf states as sources of capital. That may be part of our discussion about a lot of these new projects in Africa and critical minerals, where there's the United States definitely will want to rely on the Gulf. They're branching upward into the middle corridor, into the Caspian region, and into the Black Sea. But can you give us a sense of, again, what was the light bulb moment for you when, at a time when people weren't talking about this, at a time when people were talking about India versus China, and they were talking about the Euro-Atlantic world, you staked out ground and said, we should be thinking about an Indo-Abrahamic corridor, or an India-Middle East, a Europe corridor. What was the light bulb moment for you that said, not only is this important, but this may in fact become the pivot around which the 21st century global economy may end up revolving around?
Excellent question, and I appreciate it really, Nick. I don't have a particular moment when I had like this holy moly moment where, like, oh, this is a thing. I think it was incremental. It was absolutely incremental. But there were some inflection points along the line. I started writing the thesis about Indo-Abrahamic alliance, which brings Israel and UAE and India together right before the normalization between the UAE and Israel, because I sensed that there is an alignment that's taking place. It's very much more of a silent alignment. Fast forward 2026, during the Iran war, this is no longer silent. This is front and center alliance. But at that time, it felt to me that those countries share certain thinking around the question of what's the future of this massive region after American hegemony, period. They're thinking about it. And at least they share an idea of how they can build a security architecture that acts as a substructure or sub-architecture under an overall American security role, because America is not going anywhere. But we can play more of a secondary substructure, security architecture that can help us achieve some security objectives that we care about, as Delhi, as Tel Aviv, as Abu Dhabi. The second inflection point was the border clashes between India and China. And that was very clear to me that India will have to pivot to West Asia as a strategic space, because it's not really connected to the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific, the old terminology, in ways that allow India to achieve its full economic potential in a situation where Chinese overcapacity is overwhelming the entire Asian economy. So you have to look for other strategic space for you as India. And for me, it was West Asia. It was the Gulf states. It is Europe. And then for the UAE and potentially Saudi Arabia, it was the idea that they're acting as nerve centers in the global economy. So their AI ambitions, the role they play in logistics, the role they play in aviation, in services, which all got vindicated right now during the Iran war. The very idea that there's a lot of things that are very much connected to the health and the safety and security of the Gulf is a reflection of their own integration in the global economy and the leading role that they play. So that's another inflection point. So there is an interest for them to build resiliency, to build connectivity, to make those connectivity initiatives much more institutionalized. And then the third part here is the question of Europe. And I make the case in the book, there's a whole chapter about Europe and West Asia called The New Meaning of East of Suez in my book. And I make the case that after 2022, and that was a big inflection point in my thinking, that Europe became an island. The entire post 1991 Eurasian integration project between the former Soviet Union and Europe no longer exists, might not come back again alive in the next 15 years, 20 years, period. So Europe, like India, want a strategic space. That strategic space is clearly West Asia. I'm going to refrain from using any German terminology here because that might be controversial. But they do need a strategic space. And that strategic space doesn't mean a military posture, but it means trade, goods, services, industrialization, energy security. I mean, to give people an idea. The moment the Russians invaded Ukraine, and of course, the European markets, European economies rushed to divest from Russian gas, it was Qatar, Algeria, and Egypt that stepped in to go and supply Europe with gas in a moment of need. To give people an idea, the Qatar LNG is 40% of UK gas consumption today. They didn't have to do that, but it was part of the idea of that connectivity from Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. To give people even numbers about the connectivity that's taking place and taking shape, and this is not really a bunch of public intellectuals trying to theorizing things. This is actual reality. The Europeans and the Indians have signed a trade agreement earlier in the year, if you remember. The trade volume between India and the European states, goods and services, is about $180 billion. India's trade with the United Arab Emirates is $100 billion today, will be doubled in the next 4 or 5 years. India's trade with Saudi Arabia is $50 billion, will be doubled next 4 or 5 years. So India's trade only with Saudi and the UAE is almost close to the same trade volume that they have with the entire EU. This is the reality of today. So my thesis, of course, started with thinking about what post-American hegemony or American hegemony minus, that's the term I use, American hegemony minus, because I don't think that America will fully retreat. I don't buy that term, but it will recalibrate, it will change. So you're going to have substructure, sub-security architectures emerge. And this is when I start thinking about this intersection that's taking place between India, UAE, and Israel. And also in the same vein, I was thinking about the question of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, so the Indo-Islamic component of West Asia. And both of those coalitions are thinking about how to create an institutional framework that bring together South Asia, Middle East, Old Middle East, and the Mediterranean Sea together. And I think today, those two coalitions, as I said in the book, are living side by side, have different security objectives, could align, could divert. By the end of the day, they have the same effect, the cohesion, the coherence of a system. A system is not being built only based on cooperation and being friends. A system is being cohered by cycles of cooperation and competition. And this is how I think about the Indo-Islamic corridor and the Indo-Abrahamic corridor.
So, two things I'd like to pull the threads on a bit more in our conversation. And the first is your appeal to the realist tradition, and particularly the realist emphasis on national interest as a driver for states to do things. They do things because there's an interest, they expect to receive a benefit, they pursue policies based upon an understanding of what their core interests are. And then the second, and tying it to this notion of West Asia and this region being part of a larger Asian sphere. One of the trends we're seeing in Asia, in greater Asia, if we can use that term, over the last 10 to 15 years is a trend that you and Jada Frazier wrote about for Orbis, and that is to move away from the all or nothing alliance system where two countries, a group of countries, come together and they have to see eye to eye on everything. They build an alliance, and instead, in favor of the minilateral approach, ad hoc coalitions that develop based on a specific set of issues where all the countries have an interest, but doesn't then mean that they all have to agree on everything else. And in your article, you talked about this move, and one of the minilaterals that you looked at was the Israel, India, UAE minilateral, where government to governments work through on this, that you don't have to see eye to eye on everything, but you can identify a core set of interests. Is that really the future, so to speak, that we are going to move away, instead of having these large, massive alliance structures, we're going to move, and West Asia as part of Asia is going to be characterized by these interest-based minilateral coalitions moving forward?
In the book, I make the explicit case that NATO in Europe is a very, very exceptional alliance structure. It's very unique to European character and American grand strategy post 1945. The idea of Article 5, the idea that you have 24 nations together in an alliance, that's a very much post 1945 realities. This being said, I also make the case that this is very exceptional to Europe and was not really applicable anywhere else. We basically maintained very specific, nimble defense agreements with Korea, with Japan. I mean, whatever we're going to call the relationship that we have with Taiwan, and of course the Philippines, because that reflected our own realities in Asia, that we need to have those defense commitments separate for obvious reasons. We're trying to manage Korea independent from Japan, independent from the Taiwan question vis-a-vis China. So it made sense to us. I am making the case in West Asia. The region's core problem is this region is under-institutionalized. It's a region without institutions. I make this front and center. It's a region that couldn't come up with a security architecture, mainly because we are entrenched power in the region. We're not an offshore bouncer in the Middle East. With all due respect to a lot of our colleagues and friends who make that case, when you have this major commitment, political commitment, security commitment, boots on the ground everywhere in the Middle East, you cannot tell me that we are offshore bouncers. We're not offshore bouncers. We should be, but we're not. We are entrenched. And because of that, we assumed a lot of security responsibilities. And because of that, we have suppressed any organic move to build security architecture in the Middle East. We did suppress that by our own heavy-handed approach to the regional geopolitics and our own role as the resident military power. So I'm making the case in the book that we, as the United States, if we want to pivot to the Indo-Pacific and make hard choices, we need to increase European security, European partnership, and build even different security architectures outside of NATO around the Ukraine question, basically Ukraine, Poland, UK, and Turkey, and doing something similar in the Middle East. When we build security architecture that allows us to do more with less, to not consume our own resources, because I make the case in the book and I made the case in the Orbis. We have a scale problem. We cannot produce at scale. It's a major problem. It's a major crisis. It's absolutely on display right now when it comes to our own ammunition and stockpile. We need to build an architecture that brings together Korea, Japan, Italy, France, Greece, the core Arab states, who clearly have an interest in maintaining a security order around air defense system or maritime security that benefit those parties. And my thesis, and I submitted this manuscript on January 4th, 2025, I made the case that Korea has a role to play. Look into the Korean footprint in the region, from building a nuclear reactor in the UAE to Korean defense systems and platforms, which end up being very crucial in the air defense system in the Gulf, especially with the UAE, 94% interception rates coming from the Korean air defense systems deployed there. Italian ammunition that was deployed during the war. French Rafale in the skies of the Gulf. So the security architecture that was envisioning in West Asia ended up being a reality during the Iran war. What I want is for this to become much more institutionalized, much more formal, that we have a coordination mechanism. It's not just a crisis response.
I was also going to follow up a little bit. And one of the things you mentioned, I thought it was really interesting in terms of once you put out the book, especially on something contemporary, you get events. The real world has a vote of, of a certain sort. I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, did I get this or that right? Or just in terms of how it kind of plays with your argument. So I'm curious on two fronts. One, if a couple more examples, of other ways that you've thought about your book in a different sense, and also maybe out of curiosity, since you've already given a number of talks about your book, some of the questions you've gotten from the audience, maybe a few that you found to be kind of the most interesting, or ones that made you think a bit more. Not to say, okay, you got this or wrong, but just had maybe you have learned from the audience a little bit more too.
That's a very thoughtful question. Very, very. I really love that question. There are a lot of things that the book got right. The book got right what a security architecture would look like for the Middle East. So seeing the role that Korea, Italy, France play was a vindication for the book thesis. Second, this is a book that at its core is about how to manage the Iran problem. That was not a pro-war book. This was a book that was made for American grand strategy that makes Asia front and center to our national interest, pivot, and make sure that we don't get consumed by Middle East wars that will impact American power. 3, this is also a book that makes a case that we need coalitions around Iran. That was the case before the war, and that will be the case after the war, because Iran is not going anywhere. Actually, it's worse. It will be entrenched, ideologically cohesive, RGC-run state in Iran that succeeded in weaponizing the global economy and survived. I made the case in the book that if we have an Israeli operation with that scale against Iran, the Iranians would calculate that we were part of the operations, therefore they're going to retaliate against the Gulf and our American assets in the region. So it was kind of reverse engineering the war. So this is where we are. Let's talk about the questions I got that were very thoughtful, that made me stop and think and reflect and see if I have a second part of West Asia or a new forward for West Asia, what should I change? I got a question from a British intellectual, and he said, I love the Indo-Abrahamic thesis, I love the Indo-Islamic thesis. But given the war right now, I see a case for America to align with the Indo-Islamic framework rather than the Indo-Abrahamic framework. I was like, oh, wow, that's very interesting. And I said, why is that? He said, most of them are allies of the United States. It's Pakistan, it's Turkey, it's Saudi Arabia, it's Egypt. Second, that the most effective coordination mechanism that we're seeing right now, on top of that, they're the core of your West Asia thesis. They're not periphery to West Asia. They're the core West Asians. So why you should go around the periphery and go to the Indo-Abrahamic if you already have this Indo-Islamic core that will stabilize the region in favor of American grand strategy? I was like, that's a very, very smart take. I did not think about this framework from that sort of angle before. So that was something that made me think. And you know what? He might have some points here. I think America has to engage with those two coalitions. Like the idea of entrenching America in one coalition is actually opposite to what I advocate for, because I am someone who's advocating for minilateralism. I'm making the case that multilateralism is no longer going to be the format. It's going to be minilateral formats that doesn't have this binding Article 5 commitment. It's going to be nimble. It's going to be organic. It's going to rise and fall at the same time. I mean, I go talk at great length about Quad, about Squad, about those frameworks that will give us certain deliverables today, and we might not need them tomorrow, and they're going to be dormant for 4 or 5 years, and that's okay. And if we need them, we're going to revive them. So if I'm the person who's calling for minilateralism and being agile and being nimble, I mean, I should not make the case in the book for one specific coalition for America to engage with. America should engage with all. So that was a very interesting feedback I got from someone I deeply respect in London, who's a very thoughtful person, and I think that was an interesting way to rethink. Because if the whole point of my book is rethinking do not agree, do not accept certain constraints, I think I should have extended the same model to the way I'm thinking about the other coalition in West Asia.
Well, regardless of which coalition you should have focused more on or less on, something that is common to both and which is really common to thinking about the vision that you lay in the book, which is beyond the headlines, beyond what happens in the next week, month, or year, is the rootedness of your approach and vision in geotechnology. The idea that there's parts of the world that have all of the necessary building blocks for successfully jumping into the fourth industrial revolution, that you need the energy, you need capital, you need infrastructure and governance, you need these connectivity corridors and infrastructure in place. And you've identified West Asia, and particularly the Gulf region, as, again, one of these possible nodes moving forward. Can you give us a sense about where you think geotechnology as a concept is heading? Do you think, by the way, that this, bringing it back to policymakers, do you think that is this something that can become an organizing principle for American grand strategy?
Well, let me add one more. Let me add one more to that. This will be the easiest one, but really to kind of ground it back of how did you this concept I'm fascinated by of creating this geotechnology. If you can explain to the listeners who will soon read your book to get this and get this, as well as just to get this grounding, but where and how, why did you choose this concept, and then it'll probably flow quite well into Nick's great questions.
I'm an engineer, and I'm a boring engineer. And if it was not for an idea I wrote 6 years ago, my first book will be on AI infrastructure. I'm an infrastructure engineer. So I believe in infrastructure as the core component of any engineering concept / engineering system. And because of that, when I think about AI, I don't think about models, even though the first job I had in my life 15, 16 years ago after college was working in an AI lab on training models. But because I understand the limitations, the compute limitations, I'm very much infrastructure first AI guy. What I mean by that, I believe that the bottleneck for AI in the past 20 years kept changing, kept moving. It was the first part, it was the architecture type. Then we moved into the data question. Then we moved into chips, semiconductors. And then I think we arrived at the energy question of AI. Those are all bottlenecks. But again, I'm a strategist, so I believe that timeline and sequencing is extremely important part of any strategy. So the bottleneck has changed. Why this is important? Because when you think about compute, people always think about the available semiconductors, which is true. But for me, compute is, put the technical definition aside, I'm speaking about the policy definition. It is semiconductors, it's a compute triangle. It's a semiconductors, energy, and capital. Right now, globally, we have about 80 gigawatt compute capacity. So far, we as the United States have about 74, 75% of global compute. The Chinese have about 12 to 14% of global compute, and the rest have the rest. For us to just have enough compute for the next inflection points of AI, which is personal intelligence, robotics, physical robotics, we need anywhere between 200 to 300 gigawatt compute in the next few years. For us to jump from 80 gigawatt to 200 to 300 gigawatt, anywhere in between, just to keep enough compute for the increasing demand that we need right now. Defense tech, health tech, bio, everything will require compute. And we as the United States were not able to, we don't have the permits, we don't have the energy, we don't have, also to give people an idea, 1 gigawatt compute is $30 billion to $50 billion. Capital is not cheap. So when I book capital up there in the compute triangle is based on the real constraint. Capital is not cheap. Who is going to be financing that? So let me take that framework and apply this framework to the Middle East, specifically to the Gulf states. Those are regions who are run by younger leaders, 30s and 40s. Those are countries that believe that they have to create a post-oil economy. 3, those are countries that need to overcome the scale problem, the same scale problem that was there during the 1979 revolution in Iran, the rise of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and the Iraq invasion of Kuwait. It's the current war with Iran. It is the Israeli strikes on Doha. So they do have the eagerness, build a capacity that allowed them to overcome the scale question. On top of that, they do believe in AI. They do believe in technology. They believe that this is transformative. So when you have all of this together, you have countries who have abundant energy. And like I said, energy is the bottleneck of AI today. So they're able and willing to utilize their cheap, abundant energy and their own latency, their own geographic positioning to serve AI markets with AI services from South Asia to the Mediterranean Sea, which again the West Asia system, but for AI. And at the same time, they are within the American ecosystem, the American AI ecosystem. So there's a reason why all these American hyperscalers, all these companies from Microsoft to Google to OpenAI are building capacity onshore in Saudi, UAE, and Qatar, because those are the countries that have all what I have listed. Political commitment to AI, there's no political backlash to data centers in the Gulf, period. They have the capital and they're willing to deploy that capital to build AI capacity. They have the geography, meaning you can service South Asia, Mediterranean Sea, East Africa from those countries. And they are within an American security umbrella. They are American allies. So you are basically keeping those sort of capacities onshore with allies and partners. So this is why AI is absolutely consequential.
Nick and I, in talking about this, want to always be very careful about not asking about contemporary events, because as it's recorded, as we're recording on April 29th at around 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern, we don't know what's going to happen anywhere. But one of the things that maybe that you could talk about a bit is kind of what we've seen is maybe the shock about the investments going into data centers and them becoming targets, and how what do you think about this in terms of how this may affect parts of your argument or maybe even the future of the region?
I make the case in the book that compute capacity is critical infrastructure, and you should treat it as critical infrastructure. And the Iranian attack on data centers in UAE and Bahrain is a confirmation of this claim that you cannot treat data centers as just civilian infrastructure. However, I also make the case in the book, we cannot treat 50 megawatt the same as we treat 500 megawatt, the same we treat 5 gigawatt, right? Not all data centers is the same. They're not equal. The size is absolutely consequential. On top of that, what they serve, you have crypto mining, and you also have data centers that serve sovereign workloads, right? So you also have to come up with classifications about what classify as very critical national security component and others that are going to be civilian infrastructure. The second thing is, this is not the first time that an enemy is attacking data centers. It's actually has been happening in Ukraine. The Russians have been attacking Ukrainian data centers, and the Ukrainians doubled down on building data centers onshore. So both things are true at the same time. That an enemy will target a critical infrastructure, which is data center. You will basically harden your infrastructure. You will add air defense systems. You will figure out what you have to defend, what's not really as important, and life goes on. And you build this compute capacity onshore because you need it. Ukraine needs it, so they have to build it. The same thing when it comes to the Arabian Gulf. They need compute capacity, so they will build it. So they will continue to commit to building it. And the Iranians understood that they are falling behind from the rest of the Gulf, right? They know that. They know that despite their size, their scale, demographics, that all these years of mismanagement of state financing and financing non-state actors clearly put them behind. And of course, you can blame this on the sanctions, of course, but they mismanage their country. Meanwhile, you have on the other side of the Arabian Gulf very successful cities. Go to Riyadh, go to Doha, go to Abu Dhabi, go to Manama. You will see very vibrant cities that are successful, cities of the future. So going after those data centers in the Gulf was a message, was an attack on the political economy of the Gulf states, their own post-oil future. But I don't think it will lead to the Gulf states reverting back and say we're not going to build that compute onshore. I think it's the opposite. I think they're going to be building it. The difference is how they're going to be building it. Right? Will it be dispersed? Will it be clustered somewhere in the west? Will it be treated as critical infrastructure? Therefore, they're going to have a different air defense system doctrine around it. I mean, those are going to be questions around the security profile of those assets. But the assets themselves will be built. There's no question about it.
So I think bringing that back, right, the assets are going to be built. We need this region. As you said, it's integrated into our data structure. What's the bumper sticker? And I hate that term, but it's the reality that Washington operates by. What's the bumper sticker that you want U.S. policymakers to take from the book?
The Middle East is Asian. The second one, Asia minus China. 3, America as an Asian power. Those are the 3 messages I have.
That really, I think, is a great way to sum it up, but also it's a roadmap, right? Each of those 3 phrases as the bumper sticker is something that I can turn around and say, how do you formulate a national security strategy and a defense strategy around those guiding principles? So I think the question will be, does this view gain traction across the aisle in both parties, thinking as we're moving forward into what looks like to be a much more uncertain and unpredictable and volatile 21st century?
And kind of to close, what questions do you have? What types of questions do you think people should be paying more attention to?
The one question that I wanted to answer in this book, the optimal question, the ultimate question, is how to manage China in the 21st century. So this is a book about China's strategy, but looking into everything else that we need to do to manage China. The question I have for national security intellectuals is thinking about Asia beyond the question and hegemony of China. We need to build and write literature that looks into Asia as a system, but also Asia minus China, this sort of organic networks that has emerged. Those networks that have emerged from ASEAN to GCC to EU, and how they link together and how those countries are thinking about their own needs, their own national security objectives, their own industrial base in an era of Chinese overcapacity. You cannot be Vietnam or Bangladesh or Turkey or Indonesia or Saudi or Turkey and build a sustainable economic model environment where China is more than 35% of global manufacturing. It cannot work. It cannot function. Our role as the United States is to create incentive structure for those networks to become more integrated, because this is helpful for us. That's helpful for us as a country that wants to maintain a balance of power in Asia. And the question I have for you, that I have for other intellectuals is, how can we do that? How can we create that incentive structure? What's our role to make Asia minus China a reality rather than just a concept, a thesis?
That's a wonderful way to end, and want to thank you really for all the time you've given us and our listeners, and enlightening us and give us an insight into your views and geopolitics and geotechnology.
It's absolutely a delight to be with you today discussing the book, because it has been long coming. And I know both of you have been seeing the idea and how it was conceived, and now it's a book that's being critiqued and reviewed and discussed. So I am here, and the book is here because of you and your advice and your work, and I really appreciate both of you.
Well, we wish you continued success with the book, and good luck with all of the travel associated with the book tour, but as well, getting it into the hands of government officials and business leaders around the world, because it's really something that is often said but not meant, but in this case is very heartfelt. This should be required reading for everyone.
This has been an episode of Shifting Ground, a podcast of the Orbis Journal of World Affairs. For more information about the articles mentioned in this episode, please visit us at orbisjournal.org. Until next time.